Good morning. My name is Mark Baldassare, and I am President and CEO of the Public Policy Institute of California. Thank you all for joining us today. PPIC is pleased to present this virtual program featuring Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. This event is part of PPIC's 2021 Speaker Series on California's future. As a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political candidates or parties for public office. We would like to thank our sponsors of this series for their underwriting support. These organizations are listed on your screen and on our website. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle and PPIC Corporate Circle, groups of individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. Please consider joining us as a sponsor or donor so that we may continue to make programs like today's possible. More information is available at ppic.org. And finally, before we begin, if you have a question for Lieutenant Governor, please send an email to the email address on the screen. We'd appreciate you including your name and organization with the question. We'll leave some time at the end of the program, which we hope to devote to these questions. I'd now like to welcome our featured speaker, Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mark, it's wonderful to be with you and everyone at PPIC.
Yes. So we have a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time, and really appreciate your taking this hour this morning to spend with us. And we sent you a question in advance that will place our focus on the economic recovery. And so I'd like to start by asking you for your thoughts about how state leaders can work together most effectively to support California's economic recovery.
Well, Mark, again, thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of PPIC. I watch your interviews, I read your reports, I have an opportunity to talk to your experts, and it really is an honor to be here. So right now, I think it's safe to say all the attention is being placed on the distribution of vaccines. Nothing is going to be more important to moving us forward to improve our economy and to protect the health of our people, to get kids back in school, than to get people vaccinated. So there's an enormous amount of work being done at the state level, but also at the county level, and in coordination with the federal government to make sure that we can acquire as many vaccines as quickly as possible, and then work together through a very complicated system in order to be able to distribute them widely, but also to focus on those who are most at risk. The fatalities are, as we know, highest among people 65 and over, but also in areas where people of color are being disproportionately impacted by the virus, and the fatalities are the highest. So that really is the number one priority. But there are a lot of other things. When I think about the most immediate needs out there, especially when we're talking today about equity and those who are most vulnerable, I always go to food and shelter, the basic needs, what people need just to be able to survive. And I've been out volunteering in food banks over the last year. And the reality is a lot of people are in need of these very basic needs. And so if you look at some of the programs that have been instituted during COVID, they're pretty extraordinary. $30 million allocation from the budget that Governor Newsom put in to go directly to food banks, a Great Plates program, which is this extraordinary effort, primarily orchestrated between local volunteers, restaurants that might otherwise have gone out of business, in coordination with the state, funded by FEMA, that basically now has distributed 25 million meals to seniors, which is just amazing. And then, of course, the expansion of CalFresh and other programs. So just being able to make sure that you have food on your family's table is just essential. Shelter. We went into this pandemic with a massive housing crisis. If you can believe it, Mark, the average price of housing has gone up 16% during the pandemic, only making the housing crisis more difficult. But some of the most important ways that we've addressed this, again, for the most vulnerable, has been with moratoriums on evictions. Now, the profile of how those work has evolved. It was just extended. This moratorium, state moratorium on evictions, has been extended now until June. And it's a program whereby if you can't pay your rent, but you can pay up to 25% of it, you can't be evicted. This is really important. It takes a lot of stress off of families that may not have their job or any other source of income to be able to pay their rent. There are federal programs as well that are helping in coordination with the state so that the landlords are able to manage their way through this time because their bankers may not be so generous to forgive their debt. So all of this together has really helped to keep people in their homes, which is so important. And then, of course, for those who don't have jobs or who have less income coming toward them, and our unemployment has surged. We're at about it's come down a little bit, but still 8.5% unemployment is very high. A lot of Californians out of work. So in addition to the important federal stimulus, those $1,200 and then $600 stimulus checks, the expansion of unemployment insurance, the state did something really extraordinary. I mean, I think this got lost in, all of the media around the challenges and the attack on the Capitol. But Governor Newsom did something really incredible. For the first time, a major stimulus check from the state out of our $15 billion budget surplus, $600 per person to about 4 million Californians who qualify for the earned income tax credit. It really is amazing. And if you're just trying to make ends meet, and as I said, put a roof over your family's head, food on the table, that additional $600 goes a long way. So those are some of the things that maybe just one more, because it's very much in the news. Sure. Again, in terms of an equitable recovery and addressing the current crisis, kids need to get back in school. They need to get back to school. And I find it very dismaying that private schools, K-12, have gotten their kids back in. In San Francisco, where I live, private schools had their plans in place, many of them reopening as much as 4 months ago. We need to get our kids in public schools back to school as well.
Thank you. Well, that takes care of a lot of things that are present in our immediate circumstances. You've been a member of the Council of Economic Advisors for the governor. You've been a member of the Business Recovery Task Force. And if we're thinking about the long-term needs, beyond getting people through this very difficult year, maybe, how are we going to build a recovery that creates more affordability and more good-paying jobs in California than we have today?
So I'm just over 2 years in office, and it has been an incredible opportunity and privilege to serve an elected office in California. I was a U.S. ambassador. I was in business and housing for about 18 years. I ran for office under these extraordinary circumstances where women across the country stood up and ran. And came into the office of the lieutenant governor, never having served in elected office before. And what I focused on both during my campaign and then certainly since I've been in office is the role of the lieutenant governor in public higher education. And when I think of the real opportunities that are out there for us to recover long-term and really make the most of what this great golden state has to offer, I'm very focused on public higher ed. Now, before I get into that, let me just say, again, going to this $15 billion budget surplus, that the governor has been very focused on small and medium-sized businesses with $4.5 billion for small businesses, for jobs retraining, to support those businesses. There is a real focus on helping support the health of small businesses. But for me, what I think about almost every day is what more we can be doing so that our system of public higher education can be as efficient and as effective as possible and can serve as many of our Californians as possible. So to give it a little bit of scale, again, most people don't know that half of our general fund, almost half of our general fund in the state, goes toward public education. $90 billion this year go to out of Prop 98 for K-14, so that's K-12 plus community colleges. And then, of course, the spending for the California State University system and the UC. One of the things that I asked the governor for support with, and Speaker Rendon and Pro Tem Tony Atkins, was to put the lieutenant governor on the Community College Board of Governors. So I worked with their three offices. They passed a bill. The governor signed a bill a few months ago. And now the lieutenant governor, not just me, but whoever serves as lieutenant governor, will be the only elected official to serve on all three boards. Okay, so that's just a little bit of the setting of the scene and why I think this is so important. What I have seen, Mark, is that there is this pathway of young people growing up in California, overwhelmingly students from traditionally underrepresented communities, and largely first-generation students, the first in their family to go to college. And they're entering into our public higher education system in record numbers. And it's amazing. When I turn on the screen, the Zoom screen, to talk to students and student groups, you get this sense that you're looking at the future, which is a future that represents that California is 27% foreign born. Half of us have at least one immigrant parent. And these are their kids, California kids, eager, hungry, ready to learn. So, looking at what these pathways are like. Now, obviously, many students come straight out of high school to go into the CSU and the UC, which is really great. We're doing our best to make that go as smoothly as possible and really get to underrepresented students. You might have seen that the UC has suspended the use of the SAT. Already, the UC was not relying on it as much as you might have thought. So it wasn't that necessary of a tool, but it was a message to young people who felt like if they took that test and didn't do well, that they didn't belong in college. So signaling and working with our students to encourage them to apply and to see themselves as college students is something that we can do. But the other thing is, and this has really been a focus of mine lately, is looking at the students who go into the community college system and how we can help them chart a pathway to a four-year degree. It's really remarkable, Mark. We have 2.1 million students in the community college system, 3 million students in public higher ed. So what I've been seeing is that even though we do have large aggregate numbers of students who go to community college and then transfer up, there is so much more potential for students who are not making it. To give you an example, a large number, we're working on the data, actually PPIC data, but a large number of students going into community college after high school indicate their intention to transfer. But the percentage of students who actually do is pretty small. Only 4% of those cohorts actually transfer to college after 2 years into community college, just 4%. After 4 years, it just goes up to about 19%. So that's the first step. And I'm sure you're aware, I don't know if everybody listening is aware, but a bill that was passed just a couple of years ago, AB 705, has done a huge service to community college students, because a lot of kids were getting into the community college and testing into remedial courses that they didn't get college credit for. So there they are, getting up every day, going to community college, and the classes they were taking were not helping them aggregate the credits they needed to transfer. AB 705 requires that any student who feels they're ready for a transfer level math or English course cannot be denied the ability to take it. This has absolutely exploded the number of community college kids who just a few years ago were taking remedial courses and who are now taking courses that are transfer level. That's a really huge shift. So then we look at what's going on at our CSUs and our UCs. Our UCs are doing a pretty good job in their graduation rates. Of course, we could be doing more, but when I look at the CSU, this is another really important area of opportunity. Graduation rates at our CSUs are just not high enough. It is the focus of everyone. So I don't say that to be critical for no reason, but really just to focus the fact that most people in and around public higher ed are looking at these graduation rates and what more we can be doing. So only 23% of students who matriculate into a freshman class right out of high school to a CSU, only about 23% graduate in 4 years. It's actually been going up, but it's still too low. If you look at graduation rates for private colleges, most of them, more than 90% of their kids graduate in 4 years. So this is another really critical area of focus for me. But overall, frankly, as I said before, when it comes to the investments that we make in our public higher education system in California and training the workforce and in creating that pathway to the California dream, this is the area that I think where we can really do the most, where there's work to be done, but that it's enormously gratifying and also, frankly, a really good return on our investment. It's documented. Every dollar we spend on public higher ed in the state of California, we get $4.50 back in the return. It was a Berkeley study, but the point is that this, to me, is really the window for the future and for ensuring that the next generation of Californians, whatever our state really looks like, we're maximizing education in order to have the leadership, the workforce, and the communities that will really allow our state to continue to be the force that it is.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective as being in the UC Regents, the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Governors, and that could basically take up all of your time as Lieutenant Governor because they meet, I don't know, 4 to 6 times a year, each of them. So in 2 weeks, we have a new UC president, Michael Drake, is going to be on a program just like you and I are talking today. And in 3 weeks, new Cal State Chancellor Joe Castro will be on a program with us. You've been in the job on those 2 leadership groups for 2 years now. What advice do you have for the incoming leadership, as well as Chancellor Oakley, who we've had on programs before, and I'm sure we'll see him again? And how are you telling them to do their jobs and to reach the goals that you'd like us to see?
Well, Mark, all 3 of these leaders are really exceptional, and the votes to put them in their offices were unanimous by the boards that I sit on, the trustees and the regents. It really is wonderful to work with leaders whose experience is so deep, and more importantly, whose commitment to the institutions that they serve is so great. In terms of my advice, I think if there were one thing that we could really dial up that would make a big difference is the ability to collect data in a way that is not jeopardizing the privacy of our students, but the ability to project data to really be able to understand better what exactly is happening and what is driving the lower than desired graduation rates and some of the other phenomena that are happening that can help us address them. And I know this is a PPIC project as well, something you all have been advocating for a long time. I know Governor Newsom, who sat in my chair for 8 years, is very committed to public higher education, has very deep understanding of the importance of data. So there is work being done. But if we are using anecdotes to be able to understand what's happening, it's not as useful as really being able to quantify it. So I think that's very important. The other thing that I would say to them is get out there and talk to the kids. And it's hard to do it right now, obviously. Our kids are not on campus. Our students, I call them kids, but they are not always, and our young adults on our college campuses. They're so remarkable and so inspiring, and just energize me and my team every time we sit down and work with them. But they are also struggling. I set out to visit all the CSU and UC campuses. I haven't been doing many because of the shutdown. If there are no students there, it's not so useful to visit. But the fact of the matter is that from the ones that I visited, they all have food banks now. Students are sleeping in their cars. They might be able to afford the tuition or they don't pay it. You know, for California in-state tuition payers, 57% do not pay any tuition to go to the UC. That's fantastic. But they still have to have a place to live. They still have to have something, you know, food to eat. They still have to pay for their textbooks. It's still very expensive for a lot of these kids, and they're really struggling. And then the final thing that I would say about that is that, you know, mental health has really exploded as an issue that is heartbreaking. And so again, when I sit down with these students and student groups, they're just clamoring for more support for mental health, more counselors. Mark, this is something that worries me tremendously. And I think it goes beyond our ability even to be able to provide counselors. There's something that's happening out there. And certainly being exacerbated by COVID and limiting social opportunities and all the screen time that can mess with anybody's head when you're looking at a screen for too many hours. But there's a lot that's happening out there with youth and mental health, anxiety, higher levels of anxiety. And I think that as the grown-ups being able to think about this next generation and help give them the support and the confidence they need, whether it's through trained counselors or just through our own recognition that sometimes just as an educator, as an elected official, as a person in the community, being able to listen, to engage young people with a sense of community, it seems to me that all of that can be very helpful, and we really should be thinking about it. And the two of them, I hope, and frankly, I'm sure they already are thinking about those things.
Thank you. I'll be sure to follow up with them on that in the next few weeks. So as you sat on these boards over the course of the last year, as college campuses have closed during COVID, I'm wondering your thoughts. Earlier we talked about public schools needing to open. You know, I'd like to hear your thoughts about campuses. And you're somebody who comes from the private sector. Have you seen things the last year that might be innovations going forward that that will lead to maybe permanent changes in how we do higher education in the future?
So yes, I also happen to have a college student in my own home. And that's, again, sample size of one within my home, but kind of been tracking with what I've been hearing from students. You know, many, many years ago, I had a conversation with, what is his first name? The founder of Khan Academy.
Oh, yeah, I'm blocking on it. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing guy. Yeah. And I asked him, I said, well, what advice would you, this is maybe 4 years ago. And I said, what advice would you give leaders of bricks and mortar universities to recognize, you know, the competition, I suppose, that would be coming from a Khan Academy? And he said, well, I have little kids. I want them to go to a bricks and mortar college because so much of what you learn in college is far beyond what you learn in the classroom or what you can learn virtually. So I think about that a lot. And because it was always necessary to be in a bricks and mortar university, we never really thought about that part and parsing out that part of the experience. But watching my kid, who instead of having a freshman year of, freshman parties and dances and treasure hunts and hanging out and being in your dorm up through all hours of the night, cramming for seemingly impossible exams that you can't believe are so different from a high school test, all of that bonds these kids to one another, they're missing. So when we go back, I think that there should be, and there probably will be, a renewed focus on what makes the college experience in person so valuable. At the same time, there's enormous efficiencies that we've learned around the ability to have a course online or to meet up with, in a study group on Zoom. So I think it's pretty clear that the likelihood is we're going to be seeing a hybrid and a combination of these things going forward. But whereas I think we've been thrust into this need to do everything online, what I hope the counterbalance when we all get back into being together is going to be to really recognize the value of having kids be together. And then just one other thing that I do think is important to note, the inequities around broadband and around having the technical capability to take those courses online has also really emerged. And it's very true for California. I went to all 58 counties when I was running for office, and I couldn't believe going for hours and hours from county to county, particularly up in Northern California, without broadband. It is a huge limitation to us for education, for healthcare, for economic development. And so I think that's going to be a focus going forward, even when we're all able to be back together again.
Thank you. I'm told from Hannah at PPIC events that it was Salman Khan.
Salman, that's right. Salman Khan,
yeah.
Great guy.
So as you mentioned earlier, you've been Lieutenant Governor for 2 years. I can remember going to your inauguration. I had a wristband and it was very exciting going and seeing you start your term as Lieutenant Governor. It's a very unique state elected role, really different from all others. There are some constitutional duties, but there's also interest and expertise that the office holder brings with them. And then, of course, there's a special relationship that you might have with the governor. You're not the vice president, but there's a relationship there. Give me some sense. I've talked to Governor Newsom many times when he was Lieutenant Governor. And I'd like to understand, how you view your leadership role being different or similar from your predecessor, and how often do you two talk?
So, it's really interesting. You mentioned my inauguration. It was just over 2 years ago, and the governor came and swore me in.
Yeah.
And it was really almost surreal because I had been in the private sector. I was a supporter of Governor Newsom's from when he was first running for mayor. So almost 20 years ago, I think like 18 years. I heard him debating on the radio, and I just thought, what a thoughtful, intelligent person with a great ability to communicate. So I started supporting him. I had fundraisers for him. And so when we were standing there and he swore me in, I just thought, I always knew one day that he would be governor. I never in a million years thought I would be lieutenant governor when he was governor. So it has been extraordinary. And the relationship has made a positive impact on the ability of our office, of my office, to be able to function. So early on, because I'd served as a US government official, as a US ambassador, he asked me if I would take a piece of the portfolio for the state around trade and investment and international affairs. And in fact, he signed an executive order just a few weeks after we were both sworn in, giving me the authority to work on his behalf and on behalf of the state in this space. We're not here to talk about trade and investment and international engagement, but anytime I'd love to come back and talk about it. 20% of the jobs in California are in this space. We have the most active land border crossing in the world with Mexico. 40% of California goods come through California ports. It's very important. And of course, around the world, people want to come here, get expertise, work with us, build relationships. I'm on the phone all the time with ambassadors. I spoke with the ambassador from Jordan just the other day, from Saudi Arabia not too long ago, from Germany, UK, Ireland, consuls general from China. He doesn't have a lot of time to keep up those kinds of relationships. But as a trained diplomat myself, and because the governor recognizes how important those relationships are, not just to us, but to those countries, he put me in this role. And it's certainly one of my great loves, international engagement diplomacy.
Can I ask you?
So I'm going on too long.
I'd like for you to maybe come back sometime and we'd have a whole conversation about that. But when we think about boosting the economic recovery, you and Governor Newsom think about when you go to work every day, how does this relate to, what are the priorities in the area of international trade and international affairs where you think that it would make the biggest difference for helping our economy in the short run and the long run? That seems to be an area where, at least at the federal level, there's an impact, but California is such a big economy that, what would make the biggest difference from your perspective? What do you focus on?
So again, these are the kinds of things that didn't make any headlines, but Governor Newsom's absolutely extraordinary effort to buy PPE for the state of California allowed for our critical industries to continue, for manufacturing to continue, to keep our workers in our ports safe. He worked very hard to make sure that dock workers were protected and had all the PPE and the hand sanitizers and everything that they needed. That Herculean effort to secure PPE during the competitive process was very, very important to keeping essential work going. And a big portion of that was goods movement and manufacturing and ports. So that was enormous. We assumed that there would be some pretty significant differences in our exports and imports. Exports have fallen significantly from last year. More than anything, I think that had to do with the tariffs dispute, Trump's tariffs disputes. But imports are almost where they were, in Long Beach and LA are reporting record imports this year. Where we've taken the biggest hit and where we really have to focus on the recovery is actually in tourism. So tourism is our number one export because it's rated as an export of services. We had in 2019 about 19 million visitors to the state of California, spending billions of dollars on hotels and restaurants and rental cars. That mostly went away. And the people who work in those industries, primarily service industries, have suffered. So all these things that we were talking about at the beginning for the immediate reaction, those $600 stimulus checks, the stimulus checks from the federal government, a lot of that went into the service industry in order to be able to help the tourism industry. So focusing on that, the governor's budget, which focuses on small and medium-sized businesses, is very, very important, as well as these other programs like Project Room Key and Home Key that helped hotel industry as well.
Thank you. Well, I see that we have some questions that have come in, and I just would ask others. We're a little bit later in the program, we'll come to more questions, so feel free to send in some more questions to us. As you're well aware, as Lieutenant Governor, one of your duties is setting a date for a governor's recall election, should there be one called. And there was one called in 2003, and Lieutenant Governor Bustamante called that election date. As you know, there have been 54 attempts to recall the governor. There's one going on right now. This isn't the first time that Governor Newsom has faced a recall, but this is one that seems to have a different life. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the governor's recall that's currently underway.
So Mark, just to be clear, the lieutenant governor doesn't work for the governor. I was elected separately. It's a separate constitutional office. But I make no secret of my respect and even admiration for Gavin Newsom. I have known him for a very long time. So when I watch the way that he has dealt with this pandemic, I'm even more respectful of not just the challenge that he has had, but how hard he has worked to do his best for the people of California under very difficult circumstances. What was going on with the Trump administration, what he had to navigate to make sure that we got what we needed. At the same time that California wildfires were burning in our state and in the worst fires that we have ever had. The fact that he's got a family with 4 young children and an environment where public opinion can swing to left and right because of the internet, and horrible organized attacks on people's character can spread like wildfire through the internet and lead to actual real death threats, some of which are credible and some of which now against the governor. The FBI has arrested someone in Napa who is accused of building pipe bombs to kill the governor, his wife, and his children. This is a lot. It is a lot for an elected official to have to handle at the same time that he should be focused on getting people vaccinated and getting people back to work. So I think this is a terrible thing that the right, and make no mistake about it, the people who are funding this recall of effort, who are going out and getting signatures, they're all Trump supporters. They all gave money to Trump. They see a vulnerability because the governor is in a position where he's battling and dealing with so much. They see it as an opportunity to bring him down. I think it's just absolutely unhelpful for the people of the state of California that our governor now has to deal with a potential recall. So I hope it doesn't qualify. If it does qualify, I don't think it helps anybody because the governor is going to have to deal with it. He's going to, just 2.5 years after being elected with a massive majority, he's going to have to go and battle to keep his job against, again, people, the Republican Party lost overwhelmingly in California. Mm-hmm. So I'm very upset that we're doing this because, frankly, the focus of the governor and everyone in elected office should be, and I know that he's tough and he's focused and he will stay focused on vaccinations, getting people back to school, getting kids back to school and people back to work. But I think it's very unfortunate that we're having this right now.
So for the members of our audience who weren't here in 2003, and for those of us who were and did polling and wrote about it, like myself, just to go over what would happen if there's enough signatures qualified, the Secretary of State would certify the election, would ask you as the Lieutenant Governor to set a date, and then there would be a special election called if it's within a certain amount of time from the next election. But that ballot has 2 parts to it. The first part to it is, do you want to remove the governor or not? And the second is, and whether or not you want to remove the governor, here's a list of replacement candidates, people who would fill the office if the governor was removed. And I've heard that you announced last week or a few days ago that you would not be listed as a replacement candidate. This was a question that had come up in the 2003 election. The lieutenant governor ended up being on the replacement ballot. Your comments and reasons for saying I will not be a replacement candidate.
First and foremost, Governor Newsom does not deserve to be recalled. We should all support the governor in doing the best that he can to continue to navigate our state through this pandemic. And I think it would be shameful for any well-known, respectable Democrat to put their name on that ballot. And so I absolutely would not do that.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have a few more questions come in, but we also have a few more minutes, and I'd like to turn to the Biden-Harris administration and what it means for California.
Yeah, fantastic. Kamala Harris, our wonderful, wonderful daughter of California, good friend of mine. I'm still pinching myself, honestly, every time I see her in the Oval Office with President Biden. It is extraordinary. She exemplifies our state, the daughter of two immigrants. By the way, a product of the University of California. She got her law degree at Hastings. Her marvelous husband, the second partner, I don't know what we're calling him, Doug, graduated from the CSU system. So it means a lot to me that we have Vice President Harris and her husband, both a product of public higher education in the state of California. By the way, it also means a lot to me that Dr. Jill Biden is a community college professor. So we've also seen, of course, with Javier Becerra, with so many other Californians who have been recognized and appointed to the Biden administration already, that I think that President Biden recognizes the innovative policy making, the progressive approach to policy that is exemplified by our state and which frankly has led to our being the fifth largest economy in the world, environmental protections, leading on climate change, on other elements of energy security. We didn't really talk about the green recovery, but it's an incredibly important part of California's way forward. But that is being, I think our state, frankly, is being recognized for our leadership in these areas with so many Californians moving to Washington. And of course, I think more important than ever is certainly compared to the very difficult 4 years of the Trump administration, where they were trying to expand offshore drilling off our coast, take away our ability to have our own emission standards, sending ICE agents into our communities in a fear campaign. Now we have a federal government who looks to us as a think tank and to our people for leadership as well. So I think it's a very, very good thing for California and necessary, because the challenges that we are facing as a state, as a nation, and globally are very significant right now.
So I want to ask, obviously the Attorney General, also a state elected official off to Washington, our Secretary of State, became our US Senator. Do you have any thoughts about joining the Biden team?
Well, I worked very closely with Jake Sullivan, with Tony Blinken, with members of the national security team. And it makes me very optimistic and comforted to know that those who are in charge of our national security in this exceedingly and increasingly dangerous world, that they are capable of leading the United States in de-escalating some of the tensions and stabilizing areas of concern. I did get calls to gauge my interest, but Mark, I was only elected a little over 2 years ago. I take it as a sacred obligation to represent the people who put me in this office. So for now, I am staying in California very happily.
Well, I'm happy about that too. So good. Although I'm sure you could be used in Washington and on the international front. So I understand, how that could also be an important role for you. And I appreciate the comments you have about the people that you've worked with and your insights about them, because I was going to ask about that. But before we turn to some audience questions, right now the topic of interest in Washington related to economic recovery is, of course, the COVID relief bill that's being discussed in Congress that President Biden and his team have put forward. And can you give me some sense about elements of the COVID relief bill that you think are of particular significance for both the short-term and the long-term recovery in California?
So the federal packages that have come so far have been just beyond essential to us. The most recent package that was approved in December, Mark, brought about $50 billion to our state for both, the about $20 billion came for the extension of unemployment insurance, and about another $20 billion came in the $600 stimulus. And then many of these other programs that I've talked about have been part, the Project Room Key, Project Home Key have been supported, as well, frankly, as significant funds that have come to support public higher education. So these packages from Washington are really disproportionately impacting our ability to keep our institutions healthy and to help the most vulnerable, and not to mention all of the other federal aid, the vaccines, everything else. So getting another package, the one that's being negotiated right now, again, will almost certainly be very important to our economic recovery. One of the things that was not approved in December that I'm hopeful about is the potential for additional funds to help our cities and counties. We talked about this a little bit in terms of the significant reduction in tourism for our state. Our state relies a lot on tourism, all those hotels, all those car rental companies, all those restaurants, all of those tourist locations. They need, when they are doing well, they are also paying local taxes, whether they're the hotel taxes or sales taxes that go and support the cities and the counties. So additional support, in addition to everything else that I'm sure would be part of that, the stimulus checks and everything else, getting some additional support for our cities and counties would be very helpful. So that's one of the things that I have my eye on. I'm very hopeful about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So we have a few questions from the audience, and then I'd like to come back and use the minutes we have left to ask you a few more questions. There's so many things to talk about, and it's been a while before since I've sat in your office and we've had a chance to talk about things, and the time is just rolling by us. But here's a question from Christian Arana with the Latino Community Foundation. Among the many things that have delayed California's rollout of the vaccine, especially in communities of color, there's been a shortage of workers to administer the vaccine. President Biden has proposed hiring a corps of up to 100,000 public health workers that could help in this process. Since you serve on the boards of the California higher education institutions, have you considered tapping into current or recently graduated students who come from these communities and that can serve as critical health workers during COVID-19?
So thank you very much for the question. You certainly have identified one of the pinch points. This was recognized early on by the Dr. Galley, the governor, and the team over at the Department of Health Services. We already have been doing quite a bit of work to get more people available and ready. So the governor has been expanding the number of people who can administer the vaccines. You might have seen that dentists are being employed. And then just in terms of what the University of California in particular with our extraordinary health centers have been doing, there is distribution. There was a story recently about UC Davis and how they aren't just working to vaccinate their own healthcare workers, but they are working overtime to get to the people in tier 1A in the 65 and over range to get them in and get them vaccinated as well. But there are all kinds of other things that our UC hospitals have been doing. You know, remdesivir, which is certainly one of the most effective remedies. That's a California company that was tested in order to be able to get FDA approval. That was happening in the UC systems, and all kinds of testing trials for the vaccines have been happening in our hospitals as well. So there's a lot to be proud of with our health service. Certainly we're going to need all hands on deck in terms of both being able to have enough people to administer them. You might have seen the federal government is stepping in now, something that should have been happening now since the beginning of this pandemic, but they are coordinating the opening of mass vaccination sites in the state of California. The governor was just at the Oakland Coliseum, where one is going to be stood up there very soon. But they are also now looking to employ a greater number of our pharmacies to be able to administer it. But just to give a sense of scale, we have received just over 6 million doses. We have administered almost 4 million of those doses that we know of. Sometimes there's a lag from when they're administered and when we know about it. But that, you know, we're 40 million people. Now, we're not vaccinating children, but with the need for 2 doses for everyone, we're only just beginning in this process. We have a lot more road ahead of us in terms of how we're going to vaccinate our people. And I know that there's a great deal of frustration. I feel it. I feel it myself. You know, I haven't been vaccinated. I won't be vaccinated for a long time because I'm 54 years old. And I want to get out there. I want to be back in the community and do it safely. And though I'm not high risk, I live with my husband. He's higher risk than I am. He's, you know, there's a lot that's going on right now and a lot of need to get our people vaccinated. And so people being frustrated, I get it. There aren't enough vaccines to go around yet. But the governor is so committed to this and working so hard with his team. And I see it up close because he allows me unfettered access to his administration to ask them to brief my staff. Just going back to what you were talking about before, that the governor sees it's important that the lieutenant governor is up to speed. So I have a window into this. Yeah. It is hard work. Could we have done better? Of course, but we have a long way to go, and we need everyone to stay safe, to keep their social distance, to wash their hands, to stay home on Super Bowl Sunday, and to be patient as we do what we can to get the vaccines rolled out quickly.
Thank you. Time for a couple of other audience questions that have come in from Howard Walensky. Do you think the governor's proposed budget for UC and CSU is adequate at 3% ongoing funding?
You know, Howard, you remind me of something someone once said about grandparents, that when you ask how much time do grandparents want to be with their grandchildren, how much is enough? And the answer is more. So from my perspective, as someone who believes so strongly in the power of public higher education to catapult our state into further into the 21st century, as a model for the world? My answer is more. But we have to be, for this cycle, satisfied with the 3% increase. The governor did stipulate that it comes with a requirement that there not be tuition increases, that the funding, the additional funding, go toward addressing inequities, toward improving online learning, and toward, frankly, making sure that the education students are getting are going to help them get jobs in the workforce. So there's a lot going on, but no, Howard, my answer is always going to be more. But I am very happy that there was an increase and that the governor has focused these allocations on some of the priorities that I also believe are really important right now.
Thank you. Okay, a third question. As a queer student in the UC system who transferred from a community college, go Saddleback, community college was essential to my success and a huge part of my academic career. However, I was wondering if there are future policy initiatives to make community college free to all California students, not just high school students in community college classes, as is the status quo, to increase access to marginalized groups and anyone attempting to transfer to save costs.
So if you could put in the chat, what is your name? Let's see.
We did not have
we don't say, all right. But if you could just, I would be really curious how many years you were in the community college and how many years you think you're likely to take at the UC, if you don't mind, for my own little data collection or my anecdotal collection. Thank you very much for your question. Congratulations to you for making that transition. And thank you for recognizing how important it is that the community college be affordable and accessible. So currently the first 2 years, I think that's correct, 2 years are free, as you say, right out of high school. You know what, I will tell you, by and large, we don't talk that much about affordability of community college in terms of the cost, because it's mostly free if you're coming in right out of college. The costs associated with it tend to be mostly around the opportunity cost of not being in school, right? So you have a job instead of going to school. And then, of course, if you buying books and if you have to travel to go to school. But I appreciate your recognition that it really does have to be accessible in order to be that gateway. And one of the things in all this, Mark, I always think it's important to recognize is that when I'm so passionate about this pathway, but part of it is because of how much it's affected me in my life. Sure. My grandmother never learned to read. My grandmother never learned to read, never learned to write. She lived her whole life in a village in Greece. She let my father leave home, no money, no English, by himself at age 14 to come to the United States. He made his way to the Valley of California to work as a farm worker and go to public school. After high school, which he was okay, he was in remedial English, but he was accepted to Sac State, moved to Sacramento, and he didn't quite graduate. I was the first in my family to go to a four-year college and graduate. But he got a great education, and it completely transformed the trajectory of his life. He went on to be a very successful businessman, and my life. My grandmother in Europe couldn't read. She lets her son come to California, and in one generation, the president of the United States sent her granddaughter back to Europe as an American ambassador. So I know I have an extreme story, but I also know that millions of Californians are walking this pathway every day. And the more that we can make it as accessible and as efficient as possible, the more of the success stories that we will have, and they lift us all up.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I promised that we would say goodbye at around noon, but I have one more question I'd like to ask you to as we say our goodbyes for now, amid the serious challenges facing our state and our nation today, what gives you hope looking ahead?
So public higher education in California, Mark, gives me a lot of hope. As I said before, I see this demographic shift in our state that has led to 75% of the students in the CSU system are from traditionally underrepresented communities. I see the future of our country, the future of American power, through the lens of the students growing up in our system and coming through higher education, whether it's community college or all the way into the UC. That gives me great hope. I'm a big believer in the inexhaustible flame of American ingenuity and persistence. I believe it to my core. And in California, Mark, I feel like I witness it almost every day.
Thank you. Well, we're gonna end on that positive note. I'd like to thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for taking the time today and for your leadership in California.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone who came today, and thank you, PPIC, for the incredibly important work that you do in helping people like me do our job.
Thank you. I'd also again like to thank our sponsors and finally thank everyone who has joined us online today. Later today, you'll receive a survey. Please fill it out and let us know what you thought about this program. Thank you again for joining us, and please be safe and have a good afternoon.